When I first met Daniel, it felt like the universe had finally decided to hand me a piece of happiness I'd been waiting for all my life. We met at a friend's rooftop party in Brooklyn, with the Manhattan skyline glowing behind him like some cinematic backdrop. He was charming, too charming, I would later realize, and spoke in a way that made you feel like the only person in the world worth listening to. We started talking that night about everything: books, childhood memories, ridiculous fears. He told me about his love for photography and how he dreamed of opening his own gallery someday. I told him about my writing, my stubborn obsession with documenting the tiniest details of life. It felt like we'd known each other for years, not hours. In the first few weeks, he was relentless with his attention. Morning texts, late-night calls. Little notes slipped into my bag when I wasn't looking. He'd send me photos of a sunrise over the East River, captioned with, "For you." My friends warned me that it all seemed a little too fast, but I was swept away. I thought, finally, someone who loves as fiercely as I do. But slowly, little cracks began to show. At first, I brushed them off, because that's what you do when you want something to work. He started canceling our plans last minute, always with a vague excuse about work or feeling off. He stopped asking me questions about my day, my work, my feelings. The conversations became one-sided, him talking, me listening. One evening, I was telling him about a difficult day at the publishing house, how one of our authors had a meltdown over an editorial change. I barely got 2 sentences in before he interrupted, saying, "Speaking of stress, you won't believe what happened to me today," and launched into a 10-minute rant about his coworker stealing his stapler. I remember sitting there, my coffee growing cold, wondering when I'd become just a backdrop in my own relationship. I told myself it was just a phase, that relationships have ebbs and flows. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "You're not being loved, you're being used for your love." It wasn't until the night of my birthday that the truth began to sink in. My 28th birthday was on a Friday that year, and I'd been quietly looking forward to it for weeks. I'm not the kind of person who expects grand gestures, honestly. A cozy dinner, a small cake, and genuine effort mean more to me than any elaborate surprise. But this time, I was secretly hoping Daniel would go out of his way to make it special. After all, it was our first birthday together since we started dating. The day began with nothing. No happy birthday text when I woke up, no call, not even an emoji. I told myself maybe he was planning something big for later, but by lunchtime, the absence of any acknowledgement started to sting. I kept checking my phone, the way someone might look out the window for a late guest, hoping they'd just gotten stuck in traffic. At 2 p.m., he finally called. Not to wish me happy birthday, no. It was to ask if I could pick up his dry cleaning because he was slammed at work. I remember pausing, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. I agreed, partly out of habit, partly out of disbelief. That evening, my friends had arranged a small get-together at a wine bar in Williamsburg. I had told Daniel about it weeks before, and he promised he'd be there. I wore the deep green dress he once said made my eyes look like the forest after rain. My friends were already seated when I arrived, and the first thing they asked was, "Where's Daniel?" I shrugged, pretending not to notice the concerned glances they exchanged. He showed up an hour late, smelling faintly of beer, with no gift, no flowers, just a distracted smile and the excuse that traffic was insane. He kissed my cheek like I was an acquaintance he'd run into by chance. During the night, he barely spoke to me. Instead, he held court at the end of the table, telling stories about his recent photography shoot, making sure everyone was listening. I sat there, swirling my wine, wondering if anyone else noticed how little he looked in my direction. The breaking point came when the waitress brought out a small cake my friends had ordered. Everyone sang, and I caught Daniel glancing at his phone halfway through. He didn't take a single photo, didn't squeeze my hand, didn't even make eye contact. When the night ended, he offered to walk me home, but the conversation was awkward. I asked, gently, "Did you forget it was my birthday?" He laughed, as if the question was absurd. "Of course not. I just don't think birthdays are a big deal. You're an adult." And in that moment, it hit me, this wasn't about birthdays. This was about effort, about care, about whether I mattered enough for him to notice. I walked into my apartment that night with the bitter taste of realization. I was celebrating a milestone in my life with someone who didn't even want to be there. It was the first time I seriously wondered if I was the only one holding our relationship together. After my birthday, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, more like a hairline crack in glass. At first, you barely notice it, but it's there, growing with every tiny impact. Daniel and I kept seeing each other, but the rhythm of our relationship had changed. Or maybe I was just finally noticing the rhythm for what it was, one-sided. He called when he needed something. He made plans that revolved entirely around his schedule. If I brought up something important to me, the conversation somehow boomeranged back to him. One Saturday in late October, we had planned to go to the farmers' market in Union Square. I had been looking forward to it all week. The air had that crisp, golden quality that makes New York in autumn feel almost romantic. But an hour before we were supposed to meet, Daniel texted, "Can't make it. Editing a shoot. Rain check." I stared at my phone, frustration burning in my chest. This was the third time that month he'd canceled at the last minute. I decided to go alone. Walking through the market, I watched couples laughing together over apple cider, picking out pumpkins, and it struck me, these weren't extraordinary moments, but they were shared. That's what made them special. I didn't have that. Later that week, I tried to talk to him. We were at his apartment in Greenpoint, and he was sitting on the couch editing photos on his laptop. I said, "Daniel, do you feel like we're drifting?" He didn't even look up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it feels like I'm the only one putting in effort. Like I'm carrying this thing on my own." Finally, he glanced up, his expression somewhere between confusion and mild irritation. "You're overthinking. Relationships aren't supposed to be work all the time. You just let things be. Let things be." That was his solution, to simply ignore the imbalance and hope it would magically fix itself. The next day, my friend Leah invited me for coffee. She'd been my closest confidant since college, the kind of friend who could read my mood from a single text. We sat in a corner booth at a cafe in Park Slope, and I told her everything. She listened, eyes narrowing at certain parts, especially when I mentioned the birthday. "Do you realize," she said finally, "that you've spent more time making excuses for him than actually enjoying being with him?" Her words landed like a weight in my stomach. She was right. I'd been rationalizing his neglect, bending myself into shapes just to make his absence feel normal. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a single thought looping in my mind. What if I stopped trying? The scary part wasn't imagining the relationship ending, it was imagining that he might not even notice. After that conversation with Leah, I decided to try something different. I would stop being the one to initiate. No morning texts, no "How was your day?" messages, no dropping everything to see him. I wanted to see what would happen if I simply stepped back. At first, it felt strange, almost wrong. We'd gotten into a pattern where I was the one keeping the connection alive, like constantly tending a small fire so it wouldn't go out. Now, I was letting it burn on its own. Days passed. He didn't call. He didn't text. When he finally reached out, it was on the fourth day, and his message was short. "Hey, are you free to help me carry some equipment on Saturday?" No. "How have you been?" No acknowledgement of the silence. Just a request for my time and effort. I didn't answer right away. I was sitting in a small cafe in Soho, sipping on a cappuccino and watching the rain blur the edges of the street outside. I thought about how easy it had been for him to go days without even checking in, and how much it had hurt me to realize I wasn't on his mind. Eventually, I replied, "Sorry, I have plans." Saturday came and went. No follow-up, no attempt to reschedule. The next week, we ran into each other at a mutual friend's gallery opening in the Lower East Side. He seemed surprised to see me, as if my existence outside of his convenience hadn't occurred to him. "Hey," he said, giving me a half-smile. "You've been quiet." "I've been busy," I replied simply and turned my attention back to the art on the wall. I could feel his gaze linger for a moment before he drifted off to talk to someone else. Walking home that night, the city buzzing softly around me, I realized something. My absence hadn't created any urgency for him. If anything, it had just given him more space to do exactly what he'd been doing all along, living his life without making room for me in it. Leah called me later that evening. So? Did he notice? I laughed, but it was the hollow kind of laugh. Not really. It's like I was never there to begin with. For the first time, the thought of ending things didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like a relief waiting to happen. The decision didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly, like the first light of dawn seeping into a dark room. I found myself noticing all the little ways Daniel's indifference had affected me, the constant anxiety before every call or text, the small self-doubt that crept in every time he canceled plans, the way I'd rearranged my life around someone who rarely reciprocated. It was on a Wednesday evening when it finally crystallized. I was walking along the East River, the skyline glowing orange under the setting sun. I had my headphones on, but I wasn't really listening to the music. I was thinking about Daniel, about us, about the months I had spent bending myself into shapes he never asked for. I realized that I didn't just want to be noticed. I wanted to be valued. And he couldn't or wouldn't do that. I texted him, "Can we meet tomorrow? I need to talk." He agreed without hesitation, but I knew by then that hesitation was all I needed to feel certain. The next day, we met at a small cafe in Williamsburg that had been neutral territory from the start. The one with the big windows and warm light filtering through, where I could speak without feeling trapped. I ordered tea. He got a black coffee. For a moment, we just sat there, the hum of the cafe around us, and I realized I felt calm for the first time in months. "I've been thinking," I began, careful, measured, "about us." Daniel, predictably, leaned back in his chair. And I don't think this is working. I've realized that I'm the only one putting in effort. I've been carrying this relationship alone, and I can't do it anymore. He frowned. "Carrying it? Come on. You know I care about you. You're overreacting." I shook my head.
No, Daniel.
I've tried. I've given this everything I have. But love isn't supposed to feel like this, like you're constantly reaching, and the other person doesn't even notice. He paused, finally. There was no dramatic plea, no sudden realization. Just silence. And in that silence, I felt a strange, liberating clarity. "I think we should break up," I said softly, but with unwavering certainty. His response was almost anticlimactic. "Okay." No tears, no arguments. Just acceptance. It struck me as both painful and freeing. Painful because it confirmed everything I had suspected, and freeing because it meant I was no longer chained to someone who didn't see me. Walking home afterward, I felt lighter than I had in months. The city around me felt vibrant, alive, full of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't defined by someone else's neglect. I was defined by my own choice to reclaim my happiness. The first few weeks after the breakup were strange. There were moments when I caught myself reaching for my phone, expecting a message from Daniel that would never come. I felt the familiar pang of loneliness, the shadow of habit that had been so ingrained in me. But slowly, I started to notice something else, freedom. I began to fill my time with the things I had neglected. I signed up for a photography workshop in Dumbo, something I'd wanted to do for years, but never found the time. I met new people, other creatives who were passionate and inspiring. I spent afternoons wandering through Prospect Park with my notebook, writing down thoughts I hadn't shared with anyone. Every word felt like a small reclaiming of my own voice. One evening, I met Leah for dinner at a tiny Italian place near Atlantic Avenue. Over pasta and wine, we laughed about my relationship experiments and the ridiculous patterns I had let myself fall into. She reached across the table and said, "You look lighter, happier." I realized she was right. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The constant stress and doubt had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. A month later, I found myself back at the East River, sitting on a bench and watching the city glow as the sun dipped behind the skyline. I thought about Daniel, about everything that had happened, and instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lesson, for the clarity, and for the chance to love myself first. I knew now what I deserved, a partnership where effort is mutual, where care isn't measured by grand gestures but by consistent presence, where I don't have to bend into someone else's shape to feel seen. Looking ahead, I felt hope, bright, unshakable hope. My heart was mine again, and I was ready for life to surprise me, ready to meet people who would see me fully, value me, and walk beside me rather than leaving me to carry the weight alone. As I stood up and began to walk along the river, the breeze on my face felt like a whisper. You are enough. You always have been. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.